You have truly believed in the Buddha, haven't you? Not in the form of a statue gilded in gold or the chants echoing in a dim temple hall, but in the quiet way his teachings mirror the raw truth of your life. Imagine a moth circling a flame. It knows the heat will burn its fragile wings, yet something in that flicker draws it closer again and again. Human hearts are not so different. They return with aching familiarity to the very patterns that carve wounds into their own being. The question is not whether we know the pain will come, but why we seem to crave it like an unspoken need. Some would call it destiny, others, weakness. But deep within the Buddhist lens, it is not fate's cruel joke. It is karma's echo, the resonance of seeds we have sown in lifetimes past, sprouting again in the soil of our desires. Pain is not random, it has a lineage. Every attraction toward that which harms us is a mirror to the unresolved, the unhealed, and the unloved within. The modern mind might call this trauma bonding, a term from the language of therapy, where wounds seek wounds not to destroy, but to reenact an old story, hoping for a different ending. Yet without awareness, the ending never changes. This is where the ego plays its quiet game. Like a sculptor shaping clay, it molds perception to fit its identity. If one's inner identity is built from rejection, scarcity, or abandonment, then the ego will seek out the familiar to maintain its own continuity. You might believe you are searching for love, but the truth is you are searching for what feels familiar, whether it is love or poison. In Buddhist thought, this is the realm of taṇhā, craving, the thirst that keeps beings bound to samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, joy and suffering. The Stoics would nod in recognition here. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If the thoughts are painted in longing for what has hurt you, the soul will see harm as beauty. Seneca, with his unwavering discipline, would tell you that to desire what is harmful is to abandon reason for the slavery of passion. Yet reason alone cannot dissolve the pull. One must walk the deeper path of seeing. This is where the Dharma steps forward, not to scold you for being human, but to hand you the lantern of mindfulness. Through the lens of vipassana, insight meditation, the cycle can be seen for what it is. Each attraction towards suffering is an invitation to look closer, not to push away. The teaching is not to fight the flame, but to understand why your wings move toward it. When you see clearly that the attraction is not for the thing itself, but for the familiarity of its burn, you begin to loosen the knot. In therapy, this is called repatterning. To choose differently, not through force, but through awareness. In Buddhism, it is simply the dissolution of ignorance. You may have noticed that when you are alone, the mind resurrects old memories as if replaying a secret film. These memories are not here to torture you, they are here to be understood. The mind craves closure it never had, and so it summons the past into the present, giving you another chance to meet it with clarity. The Buddha's words echo through centuries. In this very fathom-long body, with its perception and mind, I declare there is the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. In other words, everything you seek to understand about your suffering can be found within yourself, not outside. So why are you drawn to what causes you pain? Because the unhealed within you believes that is where it belongs. Healing is not about erasing the past, but about teaching the self a new truth so thoroughly that it no longer bows before the old one. It is the slow, patient act of replacing recognition of harm with recognition of peace. And like all sacred things, it is a practice, not a sudden revelation. In the silence after this truth is heard, you may feel both grief and liberation. Grief because you see how many years have been lost to the repetition of an old wound. Liberation because you now hold the key. The chains were never locked by another. They were fashioned by the mind's own memory. And what the mind has made, it can unmake. The pull towards suffering often wears the disguise of beauty, a smile that reminds you of someone long gone, a voice that trembles with the same tone that once comforted you, a gesture so familiar it feels like home. Yet this home, when entered, is built upon the shaky foundation of old pain. The walls echo with the same arguments, the same silences, the same unspoken absence of safety. From the outside, it looks like choice. From the inside, it feels like inevitability. In Buddhist thought, this inevitability is not a curse placed upon you. Masiko meaning sohama. It is the weight of sankhara, the mental formations carried from one moment to the next, shaping perception like a potter's wheel shapes clay. Each thought, each reaction, each attachment to an outcome adds another layer to the vessel of your mind. If those layers were formed in the fire of abandonment, rejection, or shame, then even joy will be reshaped into the familiar contours of suffering. The human psyche, as understood in modern psychology, is drawn to patterns because patterns create predictability, and predictability creates the illusion of safety. Even when that safety is an illusion crafted from pain, the mind clings to it because the unknown feels more dangerous than the known wound. Trauma therapists call this the familiarity principle. Your nervous system will choose the known ache over the uncertain peace, because at least the ache is a map you've walked before. Yet the Dharma whispers another way. In the teachings of Anicca, impermanence, nothing stays the same, not even pain, unless you hold it in place. This is the paradox. We think we are trapped by what hurts us, when in truth we are the ones keeping it alive. Like a candle shielded from the wind, we guard the very flame that scorches us. Why? Because letting it go would require stepping into an empty space where the mind has no script, no familiar lines to recite. The Stoics would tell you that suffering is often the result of misplaced value. Epictetus, the slave-turned philosopher, spoke of the freedom that comes when one learns to want only what is within one's control. If you crave validation from a place that has never given it freely, you have surrendered your peace to the mercy of another's will. In Buddhist language, this is clinging to what is not yours, like grasping at a cloud and wondering why your hands come away empty. Imagine standing at the edge of a river. In its current are the images of everyone who has ever wounded you and everyone you've ever loved. Some faces bring warmth, others a pang of longing or rage. You could reach in, try to hold the images still, but the water will always move. To live is to accept this movement. To suffer is to demand the river be still. The Buddhist path is not about controlling the river. It is about learning to stand without being swept away. Here is where awareness becomes the sharpest tool. Modern trauma work speaks of breaking the trauma loop, interrupting the automatic reaction that pulls you back into the same emotional script. In meditation, this is mirrored by the act of simply observing the arising of craving or aversion without judgment. Each time you see it without acting upon it, you loosen the weave of the net that holds you. The mind learns that not every urge must be followed. Not every pull must end in surrender. Still, one must acknowledge the grief that comes with release. To let go of the things that cause you pain is also to let go of the identity that was built around them. You may feel hollow at first, as though you have stepped out of an old skin and do not yet know the shape of your new one. This hollowness is not emptiness. It is spaciousness, the very ground upon which new peace can grow. The Buddha called it sunyata, the emptiness that is not a void, but the fertile silence before creation. In time, this space will feel less like loss and more like liberation. The attraction to suffering will weaken, not because you have forced it away, but because you have given yourself something truer to be drawn toward. Like a tree whose roots find a deeper source of water, you will no longer depend on the storm to feel alive. And when the flame appears again, you will see it for what it is, light without the need to burn. There is a peculiar truth about the heart. It does not only remember through thought, it remembers through sensation. A certain look in someone's eyes, a silence after a sentence, even the way a door closes can awaken the ghost of 1,000 moments you thought were forgotten. These echoes are not random. They are the language through which the body and mind keep the story alive. Without conscious awareness, this language dictates your choices, leading you toward people, places, and situations that resonate with old wounds, as if pain itself were a compass. Buddhist wisdom teaches that such resonance is the fruit of vasana, subtle mental impressions left behind by past experiences, impressions so fine they feel like the invisible scent of incense long after the stick has burned away. These impressions live quietly in the depths of consciousness until something in the present stirs them into life, and once awakened, they pull with the strength of lifetimes. Modern psychology would call this the activation of implicit memory. Memories not stored as clear narratives, but as emotional imprints, woven into the nervous system's fabric. In this way, attraction to suffering is rarely about the present at all. It is about the unhealed past searching for resolution through repetition. A child who was never truly seen may grow into an adult magnetized by the aloof and the distant, hoping that this time their persistence will turn neglect into love. A person betrayed may find themselves drawn to those who cannot be trusted, chasing the impossible redemption of rewriting that betrayal's ending. The mind mistakes the stage for new ground, but the script is always the same. From the Buddhist lens, this cycle is fueled by avijja, ignorance, not as mere lack of knowledge, but as the deep misperception of reality. It is the failure to see that the source of craving is not the object of desire, but the self's identification with its old suffering. The ego, seeking to preserve its own narrative, clings to familiar pain because without it, it fears dissolution. In the same way a flame defines itself by the wick it consumes, the ego defines itself by the wounds it protects. Stoic thought meets this idea with an unflinching gaze. Marcus Aurelius would remind you that the obstacle is not the world, but your judgment of it. If the mind has decided that love must come wrapped in struggle, then even the gentlest heart will be met with suspicion, and only chaos will feel true. Epictetus would say, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about these things. This is why the Buddhist practice of sati, mindfulness, becomes so vital. It is the discipline of standing at the edge of reaction, seeing the judgment form, and choosing not to be owned by it. There is a quiet yet powerful therapy in this way of seeing. Trauma healing speaks of creating a corrective experience, a moment where the body and mind are allowed to respond differently to a familiar trigger. Rewriting the pattern not through thought alone, but through lived experience. In meditation, this happens in the smallest of ways, noticing a surge of longing for what has hurt you and sitting in that feeling without reaching out for it. In that pause, the script is altered. The character in the story does not step into the same doorway. They remain in the light outside. But this is not an easy road. To turn away from what has always drawn you in can feel like stepping into an unfamiliar land with no landmarks. The self, accustomed to navigating through chaos, will feel unmoored in peace. There may even be moments when you will long for the old ache, simply because it feels like home. In Buddhist practice, this moment is the test of viriya, the energy and courage to remain on the path despite discomfort, to endure the quiet until it no longer feels like emptiness, but like sanctuary. Over time, the pull towards suffering begins to weaken, not because the memories vanish, but because they lose their authority over you. The echoes still sound, but they are distant, softened by the understanding that you no longer have to follow them. And in this understanding, the heart begins to open toward new possibilities. Not the frantic highs and lows of familiar pain, but the steady rhythm of a life lived in balance. In this balance, compassion becomes possible, not only for those who hurt you, but for the self that once didn't know better. When that compassion deepens, something extraordinary happens. You realize you were never truly attracted to pain at all. You were only searching for the love you once missed, the safety you once lost, the dignity you once had taken. And now you are free to give those to yourself without bargaining with suffering for the right to receive them. There is a moment in every seeker's path when the pull of suffering becomes less of a mystery and more of a mirror. At first, that mirror is clouded, fogged over by desire, fear, and the countless justifications the mind weaves. But with time, with practice, the mist begins to clear, and what is revealed is not the face of a cruel fate, but the reflection of one's own unfinished lessons. The truth is stark. The pain you are drawn to is the teacher you have not yet learned to release. In Buddhist understanding, this is the essence of dukkha, not just suffering as a raw experience, but the deeper unrest that arises when we live in ways contrary to reality. It is not the world that twists the heart. It is the heart that twists itself in trying to make impermanence permanent, to make what is empty full, to make the uncontrollable obey. Like a child clutching a fistful of sand, the tighter you hold, the quicker it slips away. And in that slipping, the ache returns and the cycle begins again. Modern psychology sees a similar loop in attachment theory. Those shaped by inconsistent or harmful care in childhood often develop patterns where intimacy and pain are intertwined. When love is learned in the presence of fear or neglect, the nervous system may come to expect both together. This creates a paradox. Genuine safety feels foreign, even threatening, while danger dressed in familiarity feels like love. The Buddhists would call this moha, delusion, not as an insult, but as recognition that perception is clouded, steering the heart into storms it mistakes for shelter. The Stoics, too, speak of the danger in untrained desire. Seneca warned that without governing the self, one becomes a slave not only to others, but to one's own impulses. If you do not choose the shape of your attachments, they will be chosen for you by habit, by fear, by the lingering shadows of old wounds. The Stoic discipline of aligning desire with virtue finds an echo in the Buddhist practice of right intention, directing the heart toward what is harmless, compassionate, and freeing. There is a Buddhist parable about a man shot by an arrow. Instead of pulling it out, he insists on knowing who shot it, why they shot it, what kind of wood the shaft was made of, and from which direction the arrow came. All the while, the poison spreads. The Buddha's point is piercing. Suffering deepens when we cling to the story around our pain instead of removing the cause. The same applies here. Every time we return to what harms us, seeking explanation, justification, or redemption, we leave the arrow lodged where it was. From a therapeutic perspective, removing the arrow often means breaking the emotional bond with the source of harm. This is not an act of coldness, but of clarity. Boundaries are the antidote to cycles of suffering. They are the riverbanks that keep the current from flooding the land. Yet for those conditioned to equate love with sacrifice, setting boundaries can feel like cruelty. Here, the Buddhist teaching of metta, loving kindness, becomes crucial. True compassion does not feed another's harm, nor does it invite that harm to stay. It offers warmth without surrendering the self to the fire. But there is another subtler stage to this journey, learning not just to walk away from harm, but to dissolve the very craving that draws you to it. In bhavana, the cultivation of the mind, you do not merely reject suffering. You replace its pull with the attraction to peace. You train the heart to recognize stability as beautiful, to find depth in gentleness, to see the sacred in quiet joy. This is a re-education of the senses, a rewiring of what feels like home in the nervous system. And this transformation is not immediate. There will be days when the old fire calls to you and you will feel its heat in your bones. But each time you choose not to step into the flame, you weaken the bond. The craving fades like the echo of a bell, lingering at first, then vanishing into silence. In that silence, the self begins to breathe differently. You no longer seek storms to prove your strength. You begin to seek still waters that reflect your own face back to you without distortion. The pull towards suffering will not disappear in a single revelation. It will dissolve slowly, like mist under the sun, until one day you find yourself standing in its absence. And in that space, you may feel a different kind of gravity pulling at your heart, the quiet but unshakable draw toward what nourishes, what uplifts, what frees. This is the beginning of true liberation, the first taste of walking not toward what wounds, but toward what heals. When the heart has lived too long in the shadow of familiar wounds, the idea of peace can seem almost unreal. It is as if the mind, conditioned to expect a storm, mistrusts the clear sky. This mistrust is not a flaw of character. It is the residue of years spent navigating chaos as though it were the natural order. In Buddhist insight, this is the subtle tyranny of samsara, the endless wheel of becoming, where even the promise of freedom can be feared if it feels unfamiliar. Here, the teaching of upadana, clinging, becomes a sharp mirror. Clinging is not only to people or things, it is also to identities, to ways of feeling, even to ways of suffering. If pain has been the thread stitching your story together, then letting go of that pain can feel like unraveling into nothingness. This is why many return to the same relationships, the same destructive desires. Not because they are blind, but because they fear the emptiness that may follow release. Yet in the Dharma, emptiness is not death. It is the fertile void where new life begins. Modern trauma healing echoes this truth. Therapists speak of the window of tolerance, the range of emotional states a person can comfortably inhabit. For someone shaped by instability, calm can feel outside that window, while intensity, whether joy or pain, feels safe because it is familiar. The work, then, is not just to leave behind what harms, but to expand the nervous system's capacity to dwell in peace without suspicion or restlessness. This is not a quick journey. It is a gentle, steady widening of the heart's threshold. The Stoics knew the danger of letting comfort come only from habit. Marcus Aurelius urged the cultivation of an inner citadel, a fortress of reason and virtue untouched by the shifting winds of fortune. Buddhism offers a parallel in the practice of samadhi, the deep stability of mind developed through meditation. Both traditions agree, freedom lies not in controlling what comes, but in mastering the self's response. If you are not swayed by the old hooks of desire and fear, the cycles lose their grip. There is a parable in Zen about a man crossing a river on a raft. Once he reaches the other shore, he sets the raft on his back and continues walking. The lesson is simple. What once carried you across danger may become a burden if you refuse to put it down. Suffering can serve as a teacher, yes, but it was never meant to be a permanent companion. Carrying it beyond its purpose is a choice, and choice can be changed. In therapeutic terms, this change is known as repatterning. It is the conscious act of making new choices where old reflexes once ruled. It begins with the smallest gestures, choosing to pause before answering a message that carries the scent of past harm, or choosing to spend time with people whose presence feels steady instead of thrillingly unpredictable. Over time, these small acts accumulate into a new way of living, one where the pull towards suffering is met not with surrender, but with discernment. Yet discernment alone is not enough. It must be coupled with compassion. Without compassion, the mind can turn even healing into another battlefield, condemning itself for still being drawn to what wounds. But the Buddha's way is softer. It says, see the pull, understand it, but do not merge with it. Each time you notice without judgment, you reclaim a little more space between who you are and what you feel. This space is where freedom grows, and in that growing freedom, something begins to shift. The things that once seemed irresistible now appear for what they are. Mirages shaped by memory, not truths about your worth. The ache that once felt like destiny reveals itself as habit, and slowly the compass of your heart begins to reorient, not toward the fire, but toward the quiet garden where you are not tested by destruction, but nurtured into strength. When this reorientation deepens, life itself feels different. The colors are less harsh, the air less heavy. The absence of chaos does not feel empty anymore. It feels like clarity. And in that clarity, you realize that liberation was never about running from pain. It was about learning to no longer mistake it for love. There comes a point when the old stories lose their urgency. The faces that once haunted your thoughts no longer have the same sharp edges, and the memories that once triggered the body into trembling now pass through like distant echoes. This is not forgetfulness, it is transformation. In Buddhist practice, this is the gradual fruit of vipassana, insight where repeated seeing dissolves the illusion's power. The wound remains as a mark, but no longer as a cage. Yet the path to this state is not marked by grand gestures. It is paved with countless, quiet refusals. Refusals to answer the call of an old flame, to replay a bitter conversation in the mind, to feed the fantasy that pain will redeem itself if only you endure it long enough. Each refusal is not just an act of self-protection, it is a seed planted in the soil of freedom. In time, these seeds grow into a life that feels less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. Modern psychology calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repeated experience. Each time you choose peace over chaos, the pathways of craving grow weaker, and the pathways of stability strengthen. This is the science behind the Buddha's teaching of bhavana, mental cultivation. What you practice, you become. If you practice suffering, you deepen your skill in it. If you practice release, you deepen your capacity for liberation. The Stoics understood this too. Epictetus taught that no one is free if they are a slave to their impulses. But freedom is not gained by sheer willpower. It is built by training the mind to value what truly nourishes the soul. In this way, Buddhist compassion and Stoic discipline are not opposites. They are two hands shaping the same vessel. One hand softens, the other strengthens, until the heart can hold itself without spilling. There is an image often used in Zen, a lotus blooming in muddy water. The lotus does not despise the mud, it grows because of it. In the same way, freedom from the pull of suffering does not require erasing the past. It requires using the past as the soil for awakening. The pain you were drawn to was never meaningless. It was the mud in which the roots of your wisdom took hold. But now the lotus has risen above the surface, and the mud can no longer stain it. From the perspective of trauma recovery, this stage is called integration. The self is no longer split between the part that longs for harm and the part that seeks healing. They become one in understanding. You no longer need to reject your past self. You can embrace it as the one who endured, the one who kept going until the light was found. This is where self-worth stops being a fragile idea and becomes a living, breathing reality. And here is the deepest truth. Once you no longer need suffering to feel alive, you begin to taste what the Buddha called nibbana, the extinguishing of the flame of craving. It is not an empty, numb state. It is a fullness so still that nothing can disturb it. You move through the world without being caught by its hooks, loving without clinging, giving without expecting, receiving without
Create
fear.
A 5-minute calm
The final
meditation
release is not
music
dramatic.
with soft,
It is quiet. It is waking up one
ambient
morning
sound,
and realizing that the old longing is
including
gone.
gentle to that
Not because
singing
you
bowl
forced it away, but because it has
rain
no
sound,
place in the home you have built inside
and
yourself.
soothing chimes.
The mind rests. The heart
The
rests.
tempo should
And
be
in that
slow
rest,
and
you see that the
consistent,
attraction to suffering
with
was never a
natural
flaw.
sound effects
It was simply a signpost pointing
create a
toward the places where
peaceful
love had not yet
atmosphere.
reached. Now it has. And so the circle breaks. The flame still burns for others, but for you, it is only light, no longer heat. You walk on, unbound, into a life where peace is not a stranger, but a constant companion.